A somewhat naive interpretation of price earnings ratio is, let's find out. Uh, let's see. Let's go to financeyahoo.com and let's look at NVIDIA. Good, it's up today. This stock should be worth $200, by the way, in my own opinion. And I'm going to kind of, throughout this chapter, tell you why, or tell you why I think that way. I've been recommending NVIDIA to people since it was $30. And I made some good money with it. I paid with, essentially, it paid for 2 years of college for one of my kids. No, 1 year of college. Let's do statistics. I'm going to look at the forward PE ratio, which we're going to talk about. It's basically the ratio of price now divided by expected earnings over the next 12 months. Okay. Now that means, or the interpretation of that means, if NVIDIA's earnings were to remain the same, and let's find out what that expected number is, you can find it under analysis. For 2025, analysts expect an average of $2.84 per share profits. Okay. And last year that was 119. But that forward PE ratio means if NVIDIA's earnings were to remain at 284 ad infinitum, it would take you 38 plus years to recover your investment. That's the interpretation of PE. But the biggest caveat on that is earnings are not going to stay the same. On the other hand, let's look at the other company that I like. Unfortunately, I'm losing money on it now, but this is Micron Technology. Let's look at their statistics. Their forward PE is 10. And let's also look at their analysis. 122 estimate. All right. Is that true? No. 944. If you're naive, you're going to think Micron is so much cheaper than NVIDIA. Normally, if I ignore the fact that earnings are not going to remain the same, I would have bought Micron and short NVIDIA. Shorting a stock means you sell a stock that you don't own. You typically borrow it, you sell it. When you buy it back, you pay back the loan, stock loan. If you buy it at a lower price, you make money. But let's find out what sort of growth analysts are expecting. I mean, analysts are expecting a lot of growth next year from Micron, but over the next 5 years, they expect actually negative growth. That means they expect earnings are going to kind of stagnate after that. Let's look at the same number for NVIDIA. Analysts expect over the next 5 years, every year, it's going to grow by 50%. You know, 1.5 raised to the power 5. That means over 5 years, NVIDIA earnings are going to grow by 7.5 times. On the other hand, Micron is expected to remain somewhat stable. So that actually makes a lot of difference. That's why, among other reasons, we look at those growth ratios. That does not mean that company is going to grow at those rates, but it kind of gives you an idea. Now, let's start with short-term solvency ratios. We don't pick financial ratios randomly. I mean, we have so many items on income statement, balance sheet. I can calculate ratio of any two, right? But there needs to be a purpose. First, state the purpose of the ratio. What is a normal number? And what is too high or too low? Just because I have the numbers by itself doesn't mean anything. I kind of need to understand what that means. The mother of all short-term solvency ratios is the current ratio. As the name suggests, it's the ratio of current assets to current liabilities. Liabilities. Or CA over CL. I'm going to rewrite this in a better way for the purposes of, I'm going to creatively add a zero to the numerator. And so ratio of current assets to current liabilities can also be written as 1 plus net working capital divided by current liabilities. All right. As you know, net working capital is the difference between current assets and current liabilities. You want that to be positive in general. So that's one thing. That means we want the current ratio to be at least 1. And let's interpret it. Remember, current assets are the assets that you think you could conceivably convert to cash within 12 months without sacrificing any value. They're basically your liquid assets. Current liabilities are your obligations that are due within a year. So it measures your ability to meet your obligations that are within a year without using any long-term assets. That's obviously of interest to short-term creditors. If I'm a supplier of NVIDIA and NVIDIA typically pays me 90 days, I want to know that number. Okay. Am I certain that they're going to have enough cash to pay me back? Because just like me, I probably have my own suppliers. I'm going to pay them. So if NVIDIA doesn't pay me, I can't pay them. This ratio is not as important as it used to be before pretty much 1980 or so. The reason is banking system has changed quite a bit. It is not that important anymore how much cash or liquid assets you have. What's important is how much access do you have to cash and or liquid assets. In the old days, you went to banks and, they provided you with a loan, short-term or long-term. That's how you manage your company. Now, I don't even have to go to banks. Suppose I have receivables. And some companies like selling on credit because it's easier to sell. Your clients, especially if your clients are other businesses, they may not have access to liquidity. So I tell them, go ahead, pay me in 90 days. I can go to bank and get some loan to cover that, or in this modern times, I can actually securitize those receivables. That means I'm going to issue a short-term bond, which we call commercial paper, and I'm going to put those receivables as collateral, and I'm going to sell those to the public. Money market funds absolutely love commercial paper, especially if they're backed by assets like that, because money market funds can invest into anything that is investment grade and that matures in 90 days or less. So that enhances their returns. So all I have to do is get that cash, and I can even use that cash and go ahead and spend it on other stuff. Alternatively, instead of borrowing from a bank, I can go to a bank and say, "How about let's do a deal? You give me a credit line. Credit line is different from a loan. Let me give you an example from a consumer standpoint. When you have a mortgage, you actually borrow the money. Okay, and let's say you had a mortgage, then you wanted to improve something. Some people go and do a second mortgage. Okay, they basically use the equity on their house, and those guys have the second priority in case of default. You actually borrow the money, but you have to borrow the entire amount. Or you can say, can I have a home equity line of credit, the HELOC? For example, I have one of those. I mean, it's fully used now, but I don't have to have it used. I have $100,000 home equity line. Line means I have ability to borrow up to that amount, but I don't have to.